Patrick Adams had 47 seconds to decide: surrender to Dutch police, or keep walking past that Amsterdam police station. One wrong move. One moment of recognition. The choice he made would end a 40-year criminal empire worth £200 million. But those 47 seconds? They weren't the beginning of the end for the Adams family. They were the final act of a betrayal that started on a cold December night in 2013, when one gunshot changed everything. And in the next few minutes, you'll discover exactly what that gunshot was, and why it turned Britain's most feared crime family into their own worst enemies. But before we dive into this story, if you're fascinated by the dark side of criminal empires, hit that subscribe button for Crime Scene Chronicles. We expose the truth behind the world's most dangerous families, and your support helps us bring these untold stories to light. This is the story of three brothers who built an empire that made the mafia look like amateurs. Terry Adams, the man who never raised his voice but could empty a room with 2 words. Police found victims with their tongues cut out rather than testify against him. Tommy Adams, the brother who owned a collection of power tools that weren't for construction. His nickname in prison was the dentist because he pulled more than teeth. And Patrick Adams, the family accountant who bought gold teeth because regular gold wasn't flashy enough. He owned 17 Rolls-Royces and a penthouse where he counted drug money on a snooker table made of Italian marble. For 40 years, they were untouchable. Politicians feared them. Police couldn't catch them. Even other crime families bowed down to the Adams name. Until the day they made one fatal mistake, they trusted each other. To understand how the Adams family became Britain's most feared criminal organization, we need to go back to where it all began. Clerkenwell, North London, 1970s. A tight-knit Irish working-class community where 3 brothers would write their names in blood across the criminal underworld. Terry Adams, born in 1954, was the eldest and the brain. Even as a teenager, he displayed an almost supernatural ability to plan crimes with military precision. He never got his hands dirty, never raised his voice, never needed to. Terry Adams could destroy a man's life with a phone call. Tommy Adams, born in 1958, was the muscle. Where Terry used psychology, Tommy used pain. He earned his reputation early. At 16, he was already collecting debts for local loan sharks. By 20, he was the man London's hardest criminals feared most. Tommy didn't just hurt people, he made them understand that crossing the Adams family meant a fate worse than death. Patrick Adams, born in 1965, was the youngest and the face. While his brothers stayed in the shadows, Patrick lived in the spotlight. Expensive suits, gold teeth, luxury cars, he was the public face of success while secretly moving millions of pounds of dirty money through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The brothers started small in the late 1970s. Protection rackets in local pubs. Debt collection for loan sharks. Small-time drug dealing. But Terry Adams had bigger plans. He could see that London's criminal landscape was changing, and he intended to be the one shaping that change. By 1980, the Adams family had moved beyond petty crime. They were running serious operations, hijacking security vans, trafficking drugs from Europe, laundering money through legitimate businesses. What made them different from other crime families was their organization. Terry ran the syndicate like a corporation, complete with hierarchies, territories, and rules. The key to their success was brutality combined with business acumen. They would torture a rival one day and negotiate a legitimate property deal the next. This dual approach, extreme violence when necessary, but always with a clear business purpose, made them incredibly effective. The 1980s were the golden age of the Adams family empire. While other crime families fought turf wars, the Adams brothers were building something unprecedented, a criminal corporation that spanned Europe. Their empire rested on 4 pillars: drugs, violence, money laundering, and corruption. The drugs came from everywhere: cocaine from Colombia via Spain, heroin from Turkey, cannabis from Morocco. By the mid-1980s, they controlled significant portions of London's drug trade, generating millions in profits every year. But drugs were just the beginning. The Addams family pioneered the art of taxing, demanding percentages from every criminal operation in their territory. Want to run a protection racket in North London? You pay the Addams tax. Planning a robbery? The Addams family gets their cut. It was organized crime at its most sophisticated. The violence that enforced this system was legendary. Tommy Addams didn't just kill people, he created a mythology of terror. There were stories of victims being tortured with power tools, of bodies dissolved in acid, of people who simply vanished after crossing the family. The truth was often less dramatic than the legend, but the legend was what mattered. Fear was their greatest weapon. One of their most notorious operations was the Security Express robbery in 1983. While they weren't directly involved, the Addams family received a substantial cut for permission to operate in their territory. When the robbers made off with £6 million, the Addams family earned their reputation as the power behind London's biggest heists. The money laundering operation was Patrick's masterpiece. By the late 1980s, he had created a complex web of legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, property developments, that served as fronts for washing drug money. The crown jewel was their property empire. They bought buildings across London, renovated them with drug money, then sold them at enormous profits, turning dirty cash into clean assets. Their corruption network was equally impressive. The Addams family had contacts in the police, the courts, and even government. They didn't just bribe officials, they compromised them. Photos, recordings, financial entanglements, the Addams family collected leverage like other people collected stamps. By 1990, the Addams family controlled criminal operations across London and had international connections spanning Europe, the Caribbean, and South America. They were no longer just a crime family, they were a criminal empire. And if you're wondering how they managed to stay invisible for so long, smash that like button, because what comes next will show you exactly how they built their web of corruption. Crime Scene Chronicles brings you these deep investigations because you demand the truth behind the headlines. The 1990s were when the Addams family reached their peak. Terry Addams was recognized across Europe as one of the most powerful crime bosses alive. Their operations had expanded beyond drugs into every profitable illegal enterprise imaginable. Gold bullion robberies became their specialty. The Addams family was suspected of involvement in dozens of gold heists across Europe, including the famous Brinksmat robbery follow-up operations. They had perfected the art of identifying security vulnerabilities, planning precision heists, and moving stolen goods through international networks. Their drug trafficking operation had evolved into something resembling a multinational corporation. They had supply chains, distribution networks, quality control, and market analysis. The Addams family could move tons of cocaine across Europe with the efficiency of a legitimate shipping company. The violence that protected their empire became increasingly sophisticated. Rather than random brutality, they employed targeted intimidation. Witnesses would receive visits from well-dressed men who would calmly explain what would happen to their families if they testified. Judges would find photographs of their children in their morning mail. The message was always clear: cooperation meant survival, resistance meant destruction. One of their most audacious operations was the infiltration of legitimate businesses. The Addams family didn't just launder money through businesses, they took them over. By the late 1990s, they owned restaurants, construction companies, property developments, and even entertainment venues. They were running a parallel economy where criminal profits funded legitimate enterprises. Their property empire alone was worth tens of millions. Patrick Addams owned mansions across London, holiday homes in Spain, and commercial properties generating substantial rental income. The family lived like royalty, private jets, luxury yachts, designer clothes, and jewelry worth more than most people's houses. The corruption network they had built was staggering. The Addams family had compromised police officers, court officials, customs agents, and politicians. They didn't just avoid prosecution, they controlled it. Cases against them would mysteriously collapse, evidence would disappear, and witnesses would recant their testimonies. What made them truly untouchable was their reputation for vengeance. Cross the Addams family, and you didn't just risk your own life, you risked your family, your friends, and anyone who had ever shown you kindness. They elevated revenge to an art form, sometimes waiting years to destroy someone who had wronged them. By 2000, the Addams family was estimated to be worth over £200 million. They had survived the downfall of the Cray twins, outlasted the Richardson gang, and established themselves as the undisputed kings of London's criminal underworld. The beginning of the end came in 2003, when the National Criminal Intelligence Service launched Operation Octopod, the most comprehensive investigation into organized crime in British history. The target was clear: completely destroy the Addams family criminal empire. But what they didn't know was that their investigation would eventually turn the brothers against each other in ways they never imagined. The investigation was massive. Over 200 officers from multiple agencies worked for years to penetrate the Addams family's operations. They employed surveillance techniques that had never been used before in British criminal investigations, long-term undercover operations, international intelligence sharing, and financial forensics on an unprecedented scale. The challenge was enormous. The Addams family had spent decades perfecting their security. They used code words, changed phones regularly, conducted important business face-to-face, and maintained strict compartmentalization. Most importantly, they had a reputation for violence that made witnesses disappear and police officers think twice about pursuing investigations. The breakthrough came through financial intelligence. While the Addams family was expert at laundering money, they couldn't resist the lifestyle their wealth provided. Investigators began tracking luxury purchases, property acquisitions, and expensive holidays. They followed the money trail from drug sales through shell companies to legitimate investments. The investigation revealed the true scope of the Addams family empire. They weren't just running criminal operations, they had created a parallel economy. Their legitimate businesses generated millions in revenue while serving as fronts for money laundering. Their property portfolio included dozens of buildings across London. Their international network spanned multiple continents. In 2007, the police felt ready to move. The evidence they had gathered was overwhelming: hundreds of hours of surveillance, thousands of documents, and financial records proving massive money laundering operations. Terry Addams was arrested at his home in North London, charged with money laundering and conspiracy to commit fraud. The arrest sent shockwaves through London's criminal underworld. Terry Addams had been untouchable for 30 years. If he could be brought down, no one was safe. The investigation had achieved something that decades of police work had failed to accomplish. It had penetrated the Addams family's security. But arresting Terry Addams was only the beginning. The police knew that the empire he had built was too large to be destroyed by removing one man. Tommy and Patrick Addams were still free, still dangerous, and still controlling vast criminal operations. The trial of Terry Addams was a masterclass in criminal prosecution. The police presented evidence of money laundering operations spanning decades, property acquisitions worth millions, and lifestyle expenses that far exceeded any legitimate income. They showed how Terry Addams had used violence and intimidation to build a criminal empire that terrorized London for generations. In 2008, Terry Addams was sentenced to 7 years in prison for money laundering. It was the first time in 30 years that the head of the Addams family had been successfully prosecuted. But the empire he had built was far from finished. With Terry Addams in prison, the remaining brothers struggled to maintain control of their criminal empire. The carefully constructed organization that had dominated London's underworld for decades began to fracture. But more dangerously, the pressure was mounting on the family's remaining operations. Tommy Adams, despite his reputation for violence, lacked his brother's strategic mind. He continued the family's traditional operations but made crucial mistakes. In 2010, he was caught on surveillance discussing drug trafficking operations with associates. The recordings were damning. Tommy Adams explicitly discussing cocaine imports, money laundering, and the use of violence to control territory. The investigation into Tommy Adams revealed the extent of the family's drug trafficking operations. They were importing cocaine from South America, heroin from Turkey, and cannabis from Morocco. The scale was enormous. Hundreds of kilograms of drugs moved through London every month, generating millions in profits. Tommy Adams was also linked to the family's most violent operations. Police investigation revealed his involvement in multiple murders, torture operations, and intimidation campaigns. Witnesses described him as a man who took pleasure in causing pain, who used violence not just as a business tool but as a form of entertainment. In 2014, Tommy Adams was arrested as part of Operation Octopod Phase 2. The evidence against him was overwhelming: surveillance recordings, financial records, and testimony from associates who had finally found the courage to speak against the family. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison for drug trafficking and money laundering. With Tommy behind bars, Patrick Adams was now the last brother standing. But the pressure of maintaining the family empire was taking its toll. And on a cold December night in 2013, that pressure would finally explode into violence that would doom them all. December 22, 2013. Islington, London. A man sat in his car, probably thinking about Christmas plans, family dinners, maybe even New Year's resolutions. He had no idea that Patrick Adams was walking toward him with a gun. The shot echoed through the cold December air. One bullet to the chest. The victim survived, but barely. What he didn't know was that he had just witnessed the beginning of the end for the Adams family empire. Patrick Adams had always been the smartest of the three brothers. While Terry planned and Tommy enforced, Patrick had perfected the art of staying clean. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and legitimate business fronts had kept him out of prison while his brothers fell. But on that December night, Patrick Adams made a mistake that would destroy everything. The shooting was personal. The victim was someone Patrick believed had crossed the family, someone who owed money or had shown disrespect. But in that moment of rage, Patrick Adams forgot the first rule of criminal survival: never do the dirty work yourself. Within days, police had identified Patrick as the shooter. CCTV footage, witness testimony, and forensic evidence all pointed to the last free Adams brother. For the first time in his criminal career, Patrick Adams was a wanted man. But Patrick wasn't going to prison without a fight. In early 2015, he and his wife Constance disappeared from London. They had money, connections, and decades of experience evading law enforcement. Spain first, then the Netherlands. They were ghosts, living off hidden assets and false identities. For months, Patrick Adams lived like a free man. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, the lifestyle he had always enjoyed. But he made one crucial error: he underestimated how far the Adams family's reputation had spread. May 2015. Amsterdam. Patrick Adams and his wife Constance were walking down a busy street, probably feeling safe in a foreign country, surrounded by tourists and locals who had no idea who they were. But Amsterdam wasn't the safe haven Patrick had imagined. The Dutch police had been circulating wanted posters, and every officer in the city knew to watch for the last free member of Britain's most notorious crime family. A sharp-eyed detective recognized Constance Adams from a wanted poster. The woman walking past looked familiar, too familiar. He looked closer, compared her face to the photograph in his pocket, and realized he was looking at the wife of one of Europe's most wanted criminals. Patrick Adams had survived 40 years of criminal operations. He had outlasted police investigations, rival crime families, and even the imprisonment of his own brothers. But he couldn't survive one moment of recognition on a busy Amsterdam street. The arrest was swift and professional. Dutch police surrounded the couple before they even realized what was happening. Patrick Adams, the last free member of the Adams family, was finally in custody. But the real battle was just beginning. Patrick Adams wasn't going to return to Britain without a fight. His lawyers argued that media coverage had made a fair trial impossible. They claimed that the Adams family name was so notorious that no British jury could judge Patrick objectively. The extradition hearing in Amsterdam on October 2, 2015, was Patrick's last chance to avoid British justice. 4 months, he fought the legal system, using every appeal and legal technicality available. But eventually, the law caught up with him. June 2016. Patrick Adams stood in a British courtroom, the last chapter of the Adams family story finally being written. The man who had laundered hundreds of millions, who had lived like a king while his brothers terrorized London, was finally facing justice. Patrick Adams pleaded guilty to causing grievous bodily harm with intent. The December 2013 shooting that had seemed like just another act of violence was actually the mistake that ended everything. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The arrest and conviction of Patrick Adams marked the end of the Adams family as a criminal organization. Terry Adams had been imprisoned for money laundering. Tommy Adams was serving time for drug trafficking. And now Patrick Adams was behind bars for attempted murder. But the real tragedy wasn't their individual sentences. It was what their downfall represented. The Adams family, 3 brothers who had conquered London, who had built an empire worth £200 million, who had been untouchable for 40 years, had been destroyed by their own violence and arrogance. Terry Adams has since been released from prison. Tommy Adams completed his sentence in 2021. Patrick Adams was released after serving his 10-year sentence. But the empire they built together is gone forever. The Adams family had ruled London's underworld for decades through a combination of intelligence, brutality, and family loyalty. In the end, it was a moment of uncontrolled rage on a December night that brought it all crashing down. But here's the question that still haunts investigators: where is the £200 million? The brothers' known assets were seized years ago. Some say it's hidden in offshore accounts. Others believe it's buried in London. But the smart money says it's already being spent by the next generation of Adams family members. Because while the brothers may be finished, their children are just getting started. And that is a story for another day. If this investigation into Britain's most feared crime family kept you on the edge of your seat, share this video with someone who loves true crime. And subscribe to Crime Scene Chronicles, because the most dangerous stories are the ones that actually happened. We're building a community of people who want the real truth behind the world's most shocking crimes. The Adams family ruled London for 40 years. It took 47 seconds of recognition on an Amsterdam street to end it all.